that Tesla has achieved 43% market share in the Korean market. This doesn't sound like a lot because Korea is only like 2 million vehicles a year. The reason why we consider this extremely devastating is the fact that the Korean manufacturers actually are the dominant producers in the form of batteries from LG as well as Hyundai. And so in theory, the most important competitor Tesla has are those that are closely aligned with the Korean manufacturers currently. So that's the core of our show. I want to thank our Patreon supporters and subscribers. If you enjoy the show, please take time to like and subscribe. So what happened was it was just announced that Tesla's achieved 43% market share in Korea. It was also announced that along with the 43% market share, the Korean government was considering getting rid of subsidies that result in the Model 3 being as little as $27,000 because of the success enjoyed by Tesla. Now, this is no small feat that's been achieved by Tesla because, as you know, there are a number of manufacturers, Kia and Hyundai in particular, come to mind in Korea, that are very powerful, have operations around the world, and align very closely with a large number of huge companies that are the biggest players when it comes to EV batteries. So this 43% is also huge because Korea is a country in which you have this tightly wound manufacturing culture where consumers will specifically support domestic brands as a way to support their success. We've had a number of requests made that we stop doing stories about Nikola and others and kind of focus on what's going on with NIO. And in the case of the Korean manufacturers, what might be going on with them when it comes to their operations in Europe, et cetera. And there's something very strange that seems to be occurring, which is instead of consumers embracing almost capabilities from other manufacturers, they've actually swung into this process where they've now begun focusing their buying on what Tesla is up to. And even though other manufacturers are starting to get more range, or at least that they can quote, and other characteristics, consumers don't seem to be moving in that direction. Now, I have been wondering about this since I first started covering Tesla 5 years ago and still have been wondering, and that is most people tend to compare Tesla to Apple. But there's a comparison to Microsoft that I find really interesting, which is when Microsoft first came out with their operating system and IBM gave them room to put that operating system on PCs, the assessment that IBM had was PCs were fairly irrelevant to a company that sold mainframes. So they were happy to find a supplier and drop the headaches of the PCs on that supplier, in this case, which was Microsoft. And so obviously Microsoft is way by 4 or 5 times bigger than IBM now. And so what this kind of brings up is there's a whole discussion about software. So in Silicon Valley, one of the rules of thumb is that people who mess around with hardware are in a bad position, but those who master the software have a huge competitive advantage. In this case, what we would talk about is the fact that, just take a look at the fact that Mercedes-Benz has known for the last 8 to 10 years that they needed to figure out a battery/software solution that would make them competitive with Tesla. They've been making that effort over time and are still unsuccessful in achieving that, which kind of shows the software advantage that Tesla really has over competitors. And the software advantage spreads across a number of areas. And in particular, the thermal management system combined with the software allows Tesla to put trucks and cars on the road with, in essence, double the range of competing products. So one of the other issues that pops up that you might think about is that Tesla operates under what's called physics first principles. So the question is Tesla leaving a lot of room for competitors to come in? When you do things like creating the lowest aerodynamics on your vehicles of any vehicle in the class, and then you add small and large things like wheel coverings that add incremental amounts of range, what you're talking about a company that is hyper-focused on the physics fundamental principles that would make their cars superior. And it's to the point where if competitors aren't matching up on these parameters, they in essence have to go out of business. So one of my worst business analyses that I've ever done in my life was I thought because Microsoft was a smaller firm, the HPs and IBMs of the world would kind of crush them if they wanted to. What it turns out is that in the old days, the hardware used to be everything in terms of where the primary revenue went. But as we've seen over time, software has sort of taken over. And in essence, we're kind of in the same situation with the Tesla software, in essence, being far superior to what everybody else is doing. And then the advantage that that software continues to expand and demonstrate itself over time. So it's our conclusion that if they're not careful, there's a large number of entities that go out of business because of a software disadvantage rather than a hardware in the form of car disadvantage, because electricity combined with software is a competitive advantage that nobody's been able to match Tesla on thus far. So we thought that the 43% in Korea, as I shared, was huge because right now Daimler and all the other German manufacturers, as well as Volvo and others, are all focused on getting their batteries from Korea, combining them with their own software, and then delivering superior vehicles. The problem is that it just hasn't been working out. And even in the home country, where in theory there are a lot of home country advantages that Korean manufacturers may have, it's not proving effective. We've had a number of people reference the fact that NIO and Xpeng, for example, should be companies feared and heavily reviewed, but there's a problem, and the problem is something called catfishing. What that is that we shared in an earlier show that there's a process that's going on in China right now where the folks who are in charge of, or the mostly US and Western trained engineers that run the Chinese economy have focused on something called catfishing, which is that there was a ship captain in Norway who discovered that if he was going to bring sardines in from the ocean, they always came in dead versus alive. The price per pound received for live was far higher. So what he found was if you put a catfish inside of the container as they were returning, the fear in the hearts of those sardines resulted in them continuing to circulate around their storage pens. And by the time they got to port, they were still alive. So the suggestion by the Chinese was they've cut from 500 manufacturers of EVs when they started the process maybe 8 years ago, and now it's down to perhaps a large 20, possibly 10. Of those, Xpeng, for example, and NIO is another. So there are many people asking, well, how is NIO and Xpeng going to be impacted by Tesla or vice versa? Because they seem to be Chinese manufacturers of some repute, and they'll be able to deal with Tesla when times come. And the answer to that is that it's kind of interesting because the factory that Tesla built was actually destined to go to NIO. And the government instead gave it to Tesla and then have NIO partner with another, if you will, state-owned auto company produce their vehicles. So the thing about Xpeng and NIO is that they have a very deep-pocketed sugar daddy in the form of the Chinese government. But the way they're supposed to be winning against Tesla, et cetera, is not working out. The number one statistic we always cite is the fact that in China, other than Mercedes and the other high lines that you can think of, BMW and Audi, there's a problem occurring, which is used cars dealers will only sell Tesla when it comes to EVs. After 3 years, Tesla's maintaining 75% of its value, compared to 25 to 30% for domestically produced Chinese vehicles. So in essence, the buying public has pretty much voted that they want a Tesla, and the metrics that roll off of that is huge in number. So yes, we're going to see vehicles produced by NIO and Xpeng and some of the other Chinese manufacturers you may not have heard of yet that are still reviewing and receiving government subsidies that allow them to stay in business. But it's our belief that as soon as the Chinese government sees things are going very, very badly in their competition with Tesla, as they do the catfishing process, it's our expectation that the Chinese government will pull the rug from underneath them, and the public offerings that they've raised cash with end up being fairly meaningless, is what we expect to occur over the next few years. So obviously we'll keep you up to date on this, but the challenge is the software advantage that Tesla's enjoyed has really sort of hurt the ability of competitors globally to come after them. And Tesla's efforts to increase range by battery shifts that we'll hear from on Battery Day, as well as improve their software, suggest that they're hyper-focused on reducing costs and improving the quality of execution over time. And so I really think that one of the problems that's popping up is with Tesla focused in this manner on what they're doing, you have a nightmare on your hands if you're a competing firm, because the buying public knows what they want, and they're not shifting away towards other solutions as one might have expected. And so, the other argument that we're making is that if Tesla has excess batteries, I'm surprised they haven't moved into laptops, because if they did, the advantages they've shown when it comes to EVs and batteries, if brought into laptops, et cetera, would make the company even more formidable than it already is. So congrats to Tesla on the 43% market share. You might want to reduce it to 40. That way you can retain the government subsidies that are dropping price and driving consumer demand. By the way, the number one vehicle selling there is the Model 3, and the price impact seems to be a driver for that occurring. We keep seeing stories about new manufacturers offering 300 miles of range and then arriving with 200 miles, because most of them are operating with the same battery packs from LG or one or two other Korean manufacturers. So we wish them well on keeping moving, and best of luck on that. I just wanted a quick note here because I'm hoping that we won't have to do a Nikola story here soon, but the stock price jumped about 20% today on the announcement of a 2,000 to 5,000 garbage truck order that they've gotten, which pushes the stock back over 40. Those of you who have been shorting this stock, Mr. Milton is a very good marketer and has been able to garner sales that were unexpected and drive his stock and company further than expected as well. All they need is one acquisition to push them into the big leagues and make them competitive with anybody and everybody out there. And so I hope they use that market cap to do something with it rather than let it dissipate while they have it. At any rate, we want to thank you for taking time out to join us. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss, macht's gut, au revoir, lehitraot, choda hafez, assalamu alaikum, hey do, zdravstvuyte, ni hao ma. Thanks for joining us once again. Have a great day, and bye for now.